His hands ached from the cold before the pencil ever touched paper. No factory, no blueprints, just memory and a name, Auto Union, that Germany's own government had already crossed off its maps. Everything he'd built with his hands sat behind a border he could never cross again. Yet within 2 decades, that same erased name would return wearing 4 silver rings, badge of a company the world now calls Audi. One tiny, unglamorous car carried it there. Type the coldest place you've ever worked below. Then let's go back to where this story actually starts. Chemnitz, 1945. Werner Falk locked the workshop door for what he thought would be a Tuesday. Soviet trucks rolled in that same week, and the lock never opened again. Not for him, not for anyone who'd worked the Auto Union line. Overnight, the plant that built his career belonged to someone else's government. Steel tools, jigs, entire production lines, all of it stayed behind Soviet fences, cataloged as war reparations. Engineers who'd spent decades perfecting a design couldn't so much as walk past the gate to look at it. What they carried west instead fit in their heads. Torque specs, tolerances, the exact feel of a crankshaft seated correctly. Paper burns, memory doesn't. Ingolstadt offered them a patch of land, half a rail line, and not much else. Bavaria in 1945 wasn't rebuilding factories, it was rebuilding roofs. Steel allocations went to housing first, cars a distant second. A handful of displaced engineers, the young Chemnitz refugee among them, found themselves standing in a bombed-out depot arguing over how to build anything at all without the equipment that used to do it for them. Necessity decided the engineering questions nobody in a comfortable factory would have asked twice. Complex 4-stroke engines needed machining precision the depot simply couldn't deliver yet. A 2-stroke design, though, fewer moving parts, forgiving tolerances, buildable with tools a motorcycle shop might already own, that was something achievable this year, not 5 years from now. He remembered arguing against it at first. He'd trained on more sophisticated engineering back in Chemnitz, and a 2-stroke felt like a step backward, almost an insult to what Auto Union used to represent. His supervisor gave him one answer that ended the debate. A car nobody can build helps nobody at all. So they built what they could build. Sheet metal came from salvage yards and bomb-damaged buildings, hammered flat and reused because ordering fresh steel simply wasn't an option in 1946. Workers who'd once assembled precision automobiles now improvised with whatever crossed their bench, patching gaps in supply with patience nobody outside that depot ever saw or thanked them for. One late shift stuck with Falk for years afterward. 3 men, 1 working headlamp, and an engine that finally turned over on the 4th attempt near midnight. Nobody cheered loudly. They just stood there listening to it run, half in disbelief that something real had come out of scrap metal and stubbornness. That engine became the heart of the Auto Union 1000, not glamorous, not powerful, built from a formula chosen because it was survivable rather than impressive. Critics in better-funded West German factories would later call it primitive. He called it something else. Proof. Proof mattered more than praise in 1949, when West Germany's economy was still finding its feet and most families couldn't afford anything with 4 wheels at all. A cheap, simple, reliable car wasn't a compromise for buyers like that. It was the only door open to them. Export orders trickled in slowly at first, then steadily, carrying the Auto Union badge into countries that had never heard of Chemnitz or Ingolstadt, or the men who'd rebuilt an entire company from memory alone. Every unit sold meant another month the depot stayed open, another paycheck for engineers who'd started this whole project with nothing but what they could carry in their heads. Falk kept a small notebook through those years, filled with torque figures and sketches nobody outside the plant ever asked to see. He didn't know it yet, but the company clawing its way back through his notebook and a handful of scavenged tools was about to face a test far harsher than a bombed-out depot. It was about to face the open road and the rivals who already owned it. Rough roads outside Ingolstadt told the truth faster than any brochure could. Falk rode along on early test runs, feeling every pothole through a seat that offered no real cushioning, listening for the small engine's second-guessing rattle whenever the grade got steep. It never quit. It just kept turning over, mile after unglamorous mile, while he mentally tallied every place a better-funded rival's engine might have already failed. Volkswagen's Beetle owned the roads by then, backed by government contracts, proper tooling, and a factory that had never lost a single blueprint to a foreign government. Mercedes built for buyers who could afford real comfort. Next to either of them, the Auto Union 1000 looked like exactly what it was, a car assembled from scrap and stubbornness, built by men still relearning how to manufacture anything at scale. Motoring writers noticed the contrast immediately, and few were kind about it. One review dismissed the 1000 as a wartime improvisation dressed up for peacetime, a two-stroke throwback in a market already moving towards smoother four-stroke engineering. He read that particular review twice, folded it, and kept it in his jacket pocket for reasons he never fully explained to anyone. Sales figures for a while backed the skeptics up. Buyers with money went elsewhere. What kept the depot's lights on wasn't domestic pride, it was exactly the customers nobody else wanted to chase. Farmers who needed something that wouldn't strand them on a dirt track. Small shopkeepers stretching every mark they earned. Families rebuilding a life from nothing, buying a car built by men doing exactly the same thing. Here's the part most retrospectives skip entirely. While you're thinking about that, hit subscribe, because the next stretch of this story is where the 1000 actually earns its keep, and it's not the part anyone expected. Reliability, not speed, became the 1000's real argument. Depot mechanics had built the engine around forgiving tolerances out of pure necessity back in 1946, and that same forgiveness now meant something different on the road. Fewer breakdowns, cheaper repairs, parts a small-town garage could actually source without waiting weeks. A Beetle owner paid for polish, a 1000 owner paid for peace of mind, and in a country still counting every mark, peace of mind won more arguments than horsepower ever could. Export markets picked up on that math faster than domestic critics did. Orders arrived from countries where roads were worse, budgets tighter, and a car's entire reputation rested on whether it started on a cold morning without complaint. The engine mocked in West German motoring columns was quietly becoming the reason families 2 borders away could finally get to work on time. Word reached the depot slowly, through export tallies rather than headlines. He remembered the day a supervisor read out that month's shipping numbers, and nobody in the room said anything at first. They'd built something dismissed at home that was proving itself somewhere else entirely, one uneventful trip at a time. None of this silenced the domestic critics completely. A journalist visiting Ingolstadt in 1951 still described the 1000 as a car for people with no other choice, a line that stung precisely because it carried some truth. Falk never denied it. He simply pointed out that a car built for people with no other choice was still, undeniably, a car that worked. That distinction, between what impressed reviewers and what actually got people through their day, was about to matter more than anyone at the depot realized, because the money those export orders brought in wasn't just keeping the lights on anymore. It was about to decide whether Ingolstadt survived long enough to matter at all. Money changes everything slowly, then all at once. By 1953, export revenue from the Auto Union 1000 had done something no domestic sales figure ever managed. It let Ingolstadt stop merely surviving and start actually planning. Falk watched new machine tools arrive on a flatbed truck that spring, the first genuinely modern equipment the depot had seen since the war, paid for almost entirely by customers most West German critics had never bothered to ask about. Growth brought its own strange comfort. Workers who'd spent years patching gaps with whatever crossed their bench now trained apprentices on proper tooling, passing down improvised knowledge that had somehow become institutional wisdom. He found himself teaching a 19-year-old how to read tolerances he'd once calculated from memory alone, back when memory was the only tool anyone had. Behind that steady progress sat a harder truth nobody at the depot discussed openly. The Auto Union name still belonged, on paper, to a corporate structure tangled in decades of ownership changes, wartime seizures, and post-war reorganization that meant almost nothing to the men actually building cars. He didn't concern himself with who technically owned the badge stitched onto his overalls. He concerned himself with whether the engine on his bench would start. That distinction mattered more than it seemed to at the time. While executives in distant offices negotiated mergers and financing arrangements that would eventually fold Auto Union into a larger structure, nothing about daily life in Ingolstadt actually changed. The same engineers kept refining the same platform. The same export orders kept arriving from the same grateful customers. Corporate paperwork moved through rooms he never entered, deciding questions that, for once, didn't decide whether he had a job tomorrow. If you've stuck with this story since a cold Chemnitz workshop, you already understand why that mattered. Ingolstadt's survival had never depended on which company letterhead sat above the factory gate. It depended on people who refused to stop showing up. By the early 1960s, that stubborn continuity had built something worth reviving. Sales, workforce, and reputation had all grown steadily enough that when discussions turned toward reviving a dormant pre-war badge for the company's newest models, Ingolstadt wasn't a struggling afterthought anyone needed to rescue. It was a functioning plant, staffed by people who'd been proving themselves in export markets for over a decade. Audi returned to German roads in 1965, stitched onto a new sedan built in the same city, partly by the same workforce, running on engineering lessons traced directly back to a two-stroke engine nobody in West Germany had taken seriously in 1949. Falk, older now, thicker in the hands, watched the first badges go up on the assembly line from almost the same spot where he'd once watched a scrap metal engine turn over for the first time. Nobody handed him a medal. No plaque marked the moment. He simply stood there, the way he had nearly 20 years earlier, listening to something real running because people had refused to let it stop. Picture what that continuity actually represents. A name erased from a map in 1945 didn't return because a corporation rescued it from above. It returned because the people underneath that corporation, engineers, mechanics, apprentices trained on tools bought with two-stroke export money, never stopped building something worth reviving in the first place. That's the part official company histories tend to shorten into a single sentence about mergers and rebranding. His notebook, the one filled with torque figures nobody outside the plant ever asked to see, told a longer version. It told the story of a badge that survived not because anyone above him decided to save it, but because nobody below him ever agreed to let it die. Falk kept that folded review in his jacket for the rest of his life, proof that being underestimated once doesn't mean staying that way. Somewhere in every Audi badge today, a scrap metal engine still hums quietly underneath. Which forgotten engineer deserves the next story told? Drop a name below.